Well, welcome everybody to the Markcast here. This is our normally airing time on Friday here ahead of the USFL Championship game this weekend. We've done our audio checks. We know everything can sound good, look good here. Cavalcade of guests stopping by today. We got John Vogel here in the bullpen. I know Pat Ruffino is going to be coming on. I have a really funny story. I think it's going to make Pat laugh. Evan Willsmore, Coach Craig Sports, joining as well here. We'll probably go for an hour or so here. I know the USFL Media Day is going on, if you can hear any of that's happening. But yeah, I'm sure they'll send out some press releases here. Hopefully, kind of the tail end of this will work out. But that way you can enjoy the episode today, your normal Markcast Friday, all the way through championship game tomorrow. Tomorrow is my birthday. Also Canada Day, a day so important in Canada. They decided to make a holiday after it. So I will be balancing. I'll watch the game. Like I'm going to go. We have tickets to the Mariner game too. My wife's taking me out. But I'll be watching the USFL game. We'll be excited about that. John Vogel standing by. John, how are you doing?
Great, dude. Thank you again for having me on. And let's get into some of this ball stuff, dude, because there's some good stuff to talk about.
Yeah, so John was with us here. What was the last thing we did? We did the rookie draft here for the XFL. Now we're talking USFL as well. Interesting here. We'll talk the game. I kind of want to talk the USFL season as a whole here and kind of everything else. And I know Pat's going to have some thoughts. First things first, this just came across the desk this week. I thought this was interesting. Out of WVTM News in Birmingham, we are coming back. USFL announces a third season. This was like, I think Tuesday, this came out. And basically the quote from Daryl Johnson was, yeah, we're coming back. We're already taking season ticket orders for next year. That was enough to prompt the USFL announcing a third season. I said, they're already selling tickets in Michigan. They're already selling tickets in Canton. I didn't think that this was breaking news. This strikes me as Ryan Hennessy decided to pay attention to the USFL here for the last week as the championship game was happening. Did you see that? Like, because all of our CFL outlets, like everybody picked up on this. And I was like, this is funny.
Yeah. So I saw it too. I think I saw the headlines coming through when this dropped Tuesday or whenever it was. I think it was Tuesday when it dropped. And my first reaction was, I think that's a little bit premature, right? So obviously this show is noted for being a USFL hating show. And apparently if I go to my Twitter DMs right now and the stuff that I haven't officially accepted, I can pull up some nice spicy stuff about how much I hate this league too. But I try to look at things as a realist, and I think that's anybody who knows me, anybody who's followed my stuff for a long time knows that I'm going to be critical when I have to be critical. I'm going to be fair when I have to be fair. And I'm really doing the best I can to be fair here. But the reality is you've got a TV deal that's going into a third year, the third and final year with NBC, that NBC has an opportunity to opt out of if they don't want to do it again. So the ratings this year are all being skewed by streaming services. So you really don't have a great idea of how many people are exactly watching, which is ironic to me because, you have access right now to see how many people are streaming and watching this. If I were to put something up on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, stream it simultaneously, I could track how many viewers I have. And I don't understand why this has been such a difficult thing for television audiences to figure out how many streamers are they actually pulling. It seems like it's one of those data points that they don't really want to release on anything right now because of the undigestible, inconsistent numbers that come with that. But you do have this deal with NBC. They do have an opportunity to opt out of it. And if they opt out of it, then you're losing a good chunk of the revenue that's kept this thing going for a long time. So that's kind of my question at this point is, what is the plan to put together for, is NBC going to continue? The other part that you have to look at is, why would this be favorable for NBC? NBC, this has been great for them over the last couple of years in terms of developing broadcasters, especially with this big giant Big Ten mega contract deal coming in. They're going to have a primetime game every week on NBC, whether it's Notre Dame, whether it's Big Ten. They still have to cover all the Notre Dame games, and then they're going to have another game on Peacock. So to me, it's almost worth keeping the USFL in the rotation for one more year, even if you take a loss on it from a financial standpoint, just because now you get to develop these broadcasters with real live game stuff. And you've got a whole season to do it, 10, 11 games that you're going to be broadcasting. So that's perfect for them to set up as they get into the college football season. So that was my initial concern when I saw this was maybe it's a little too premature. We got to see what NBC wants to do before Fox, because is Fox going to run this without them? Are they capable? Are they ready to do that? Do they feel comfortable doing that? Are they what is the balance sheet look like at the moment? And that's kind of where I'm thinking it's probably not looking great.
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, NBC is the one that, they draw the higher ratings of the two, if you want to talk about it that way. And we even had the playoff game coming out of last week with the less sexy Maulers against the Panthers here. I said that game is going to outdraw. There's no question about it, because it's the NBC slot. That's going to outdraw the Breaker Stallions. And even though that was a blowout game and ended up being a blowout game, I mean, it was at least close in the first quarter there, but it wasn't even particularly close in terms of the ratings. And it's interesting, yeah, that the money that they're getting and the time slots of that, I don't know. I mean, we just saw this morning, we woke up and I think ESPN's laying off 20 people, high profile talent there. I know a lot of our friends in the CFL, a lot of those radio stations have been shuttered here, and guys like Jason Greger losing their jobs. So I don't know what the future kind of holds, but I think there's a lot of moving factors right now kind of in the sports media landscape anyway, besides just spring football and the NFL or NBC and Fox.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the other part of it is, that's a great point you're bringing up with the layups or the layoffs. The layoffs are really hitting this industry. And I really think that a huge part of that has been, now that the COVID relief is really starting to, fade from packages. These companies were getting giant payouts, in COVID relief that really helped them keep people on. Now, as everything starts to open, everything's opened back up. We're kind of somewhat back to normal, I think, at this point. You're not pulling in this revenue. Now you don't have that extra audience, that 10-20% that you were pulling just because everybody was stuck in their homes and had nothing better to do than turn the TV on. You don't have all of that at this point. So it is really interesting. I am interested to see what the decisions are going to end up looking like. I think, like I said, I really like the NBC thing just because you get to develop these guys, and that's invaluable for a network that's expanding their football coverage in college. You can't just go into the street and pick up guys that, they might sound okay, whatever. They have some experience playing football. You got to develop these guys. They have to kind of develop that TV persona, that voice, what's relevant to say, what's not. You don't want to piss the colleges or the league off when you're calling the games, like Tony Romo was infamous for doing, So like there's a whole lot of different aspects to calling a game on television than most people actually realize.
Oh, what's interesting here, we have Coach Craig Sports standing by. I wasn't sure where, we never know where we're going to get into here. I didn't know if this was going to be the death knell of the USFL on NBC to start out, but that's good. I appreciate it here. I think, but I don't know. I pride this show on, asking the hard questions and fruitful, but at least having a kind of an analytical eye and not kind of throwing a parade party here, going every second of the day. Coach Craig, how are you doing, sir?
Doing pretty well.
What do you make of this? We're talking. This started off here with the presumptive here on WVTM. We are coming back. USFL announced its third season, which I joked and I said, well, I mean, we're selling Canton tickets. We don't know what teams are going to be in Canton. We're going to have that hub exist next year. Here, then John's kind of going on. What do you make of all this?
It's kind of interesting at this point in time. I think part of it was because like the XFL already announced like the second season, so you get the knee jerk too. But I mean, like, it's always been, I know you guys were talking a lot about the NBC, but I know Fox has always kind of been like the main backbone of the support, like financially, at least early on, and like for like the guaranteed money at least. So it's hard to tell at this point in time, but it's good to see that both are supposed to be coming back at least at the very least next year, for the players, for the coaches, for everything else developing that ways. But then even like when you're talking about some of these sports personalities being laid off and you're talking about NBC kind of developing like newer guys, where's that clash going to come? Are you going to stick with some of the newer people that you're developing, or this other person that people know gets fired somewhere else? Or are you going to throw them in all of a sudden too? So
yeah, it was interesting. Like a lot got made of the XFL losing the 60 million in the Forbes article and all of that. I mean, I'm still getting DMs about all that. And Fox and USFL is under a unique opportunity where you can write off a lot of that money without actually, losing it. And I think a lot of the Fox stuff, and I know they brought in some more outside media people this year to run some of the hubs and all of that, some of the hub comms and everything, but you're able to kind of offset a lot of those expenses where if like I'm going to go, this podcast, for example, is subsidized by, Best Made Videos. I'm not paying out of the pocket to kind of do this, but it's part of the business I do for everything else, where if you're XFL starting this up from scratch versus, Fox and USFL here, but then obviously the money coming in from NBC. A couple comments here. We'll get into the game, and then we see Pat here. We'll see if he's doing all right. I'll let him get logged in here. Jacob saying the Stallions will dedicate their championship to you. I appreciate that. USFL Day is taking place on Reed's birthday this year. Dylan agreeing with John. That's what he's saying. Someone has to have the streaming numbers. I agree with that. Jacob checking in. I only watch XFL and USFL on streaming. And then Mike has a question. He knows it's USFL Day. He wants John's opinion on the new rookie quarterback the Guardians just signed. Todd Centeno. I can't even say Centeno.
Yes, yeah, Todd Centeno. Okay, so Todd, I actually got a really good look at him. He was down at the Tropical Bowl in Orlando this year. Got in, I think his dad, as well, contacted me through social media about some different stuff, and we were talking about some stuff. Met his agent there as well. Todd's probably one of the dudes that I'm probably more tied into in this draft class than a lot of the quarterbacks, but he's interesting. 6 foot, 185, 190 range, I think. A little bit more mobile. He started out at Temple, ended up in a quarterback competition with Anthony Russo, who, if you remember, San Antonio, they were both at Temple together. Centeno transfers to Colorado State. He's there for a year or two, and then ends up going to James Madison and helps them put together one of the best years, like the best years we've ever seen someone come up from the FCS to the FBS. They end up making they would have been bowl eligible because it's their first year. They couldn't go to one, but I mean, it was a 10-2 season, I think. And he's a dual threat guy. At this level, I think he's very capable. He looked all right, at the Tropical Bowl. I think that there were some stronger arms than he has, but in terms of the athletic ability that he brings, he's definitely a great athlete. He only played a couple series in the actual game and then pulled out. What ended up going to the NFLPA Bowl as well, got the call up to that game. So I think that this is a guy that I don't know if you're going to bring him in to straight up compete with the quarterbacks that are already there, especially with Dormady and some of the performances that he had. But Centeno is a guy that definitely bolsters a quarterback room, and at the very least provides some suitable competition when you're going through camp. And he'll continue to push whoever is that starting quarterback if he's not as a backup.
We'll bring on Pat here. Craig, any thoughts on Todd before we bring on Pat?
I think it was a great signing too, and a guy like him, a little bit undersized, so that's kind of like the biggest knock on him. He's just kind of like the fighter and everything, but I think it's going to be a decent scheme for him to go into and a quality backup at the very least too. I think he's an upgrade over like DeAndre Francois, who everybody seems to keep giving chance after chance for, but if he can't come in and compete at least with Dormady, at least be a quality backup for them.
So here we're going to bring on Pat here. Here's a funny story. So I watched, there was no CFL anything on last night. So I watched that Dune movie, right? The one with, the kid and all that. What's it? Timothy Chalamet. And so I'm sitting there and talking with Dorothy about it after. I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. And like, there's sandworms and stuff. And I go, Jason Momoa's in the movie. And he's kind of weird because he doesn't have all the Aquaman, like his goatee and everything. But Jason Momoa, and Dorothy goes, yeah, who reminds me of Jason Momoa? Pat Ruffino. She said Pat Ruffino is her. She said that Pat. I said that is a huge compliment. I said I would die if anyone recognized me as Jason Momoa. Pat, what do you think about that? Don't steal my wife from me.
Yeah, no, my wife would be pretty. Yeah. Watching this, so I can't comment on it. I appreciate I think Julian Allen, the tight end from the Gamblers who left, I think he looked like Jason Momoa way more than me. So I think he's a good looking guy. So usually I get like Ben Affleck, like when I'm trimmed up more. So I don't know. I appreciate it. Like I'm a little bit taken back, guys. Like
Had to drop you on the here. So here we got the good question to kind of spin this off because we will talk actual football in here coming up, I promise, and we're going to preview the game and all that. But we got time on here today. It's one game this weekend. Harrison, a longtime friend, says I think the Maulers are going to win. They're going to match up really well with the Birmingham. Seeing the interviews with Gerald Johnson doing, I assume we were going to get a team rebrand in Ohio. Pat and I talked about that. We'll get his expanded thoughts today. John, what do you make of that here? Like, I'm not saying Pittsburgh's going to win, but if they do win, it's a really weird look to be like, you're going away or we're trying to, what do you handle that kind of whether or not, because you have a playoff team now in Pittsburgh?
Well, so it's going to look really weird because that puts them at 6-6 on the year, and now you got two spring leagues that produced sub 500 record champions. That's definitely interesting, but if we're going to talk about some of the matchups and different things like that later on, that's really where we can get into where they match up well and all that. But to me, I don't think I don't see it as much. Let's put it that way. I think that Birmingham's pretty stout across the board. The offense that they can provide, the different areas of the field that they can attack. They have a quarterback that's playing just as well as anyone in the league, and really in both of the spring leagues at this point. I haven't seen a lot of CFL, so I can't compare to them yet. But that's kind of, I think that I'm not entirely selling that. Now, in the sense of Pittsburgh, I don't think that Pittsburgh would be the team that rebrands to Ohio. I think that maybe you're going to get. That's a tough one. Maybe New Jersey. New Jersey would probably be the most likely school team to rebrand.
I know, but that's what I would think as well, and especially kind of their lack of success overall this year. But that's the most recognizable team. I mean, whether or not you want to deal with the Trump of it all or anything else, like the Generals is, I think, the most recognizable of any of the original USFL team. Am I wrong in that? Like, is that my kind of being younger? No,
I don't think so. I mean, like, you could take the Trump effect out of it and go down the list. It's Herschel Walker, and I can't agree. He's a politician now too. Friend of Pat, by the way. Low key flex there. I mean, okay, take Herschel Walker out. Who's next? Doug Flutie. You know what I mean? Like, there's a couple, and I'm missing people. And not only that, Mike Mitchell used to watch New Jersey General games, so in the 80s. So, but I've been very critical of anything New York, like New York, New Jersey, because I don't know. We've seen it. We do have a little bit of substance with the Guardians in 2020. They had the Brooklyn Black Tips in 2014, 2015. Brian Woods' first go around, and then when I actually went to one of these games, they played at Hofstra, was the Hartford Colonials. And those guys didn't draw very well either. I don't remember what the Hitmen did. I was a little young. I didn't go to any of those games. But I mean, like, there's recent data there that would, to me, show that it doesn't really work out as well as we wanted to. But then you can go to, like, D.C., and granted, it's a couple hours away. But, like, D.C. football is different in Virginia, Maryland, like the DMV area. So it's like, and they have, Audi Field's like the perfect stadium too, right? I think we can all agree. Like that 18,000, you show up 18,000 in that 18,000 stadium, it looks wild. You show up 18,000 in a 60,000 person stadium, no one cares about that, So, I think they have to go to New Jersey just so they can try it, and then it not work. If it doesn't work, if it works, then hey man, I'll take that, this clip of Pat Ruffino said, like, football doesn't work. I'm good with that. Prove me wrong. But I think New Jersey is, because I think New Orleans would do pretty okay, and I think Houston would do pretty good too at some point. But keep that Canton Legends in the back pocket. Don't can I say blow your load? Like, don't show your card on that too early.
Well, it's hard because I think the Canton thing proved this year, and obviously we had the two like pseudo teams, but it didn't work particularly well, at least compared to at least Memphis and kind of how they showed up there. Coach Craig, what would you like to see them do? Because I think they're in this conundrum. Like we are officially selling tickets, right? We're selling tickets for the hub, but we'll announce teams later. Like, what do you make of that? What would you do?
Yeah, it's just interesting because you're selling something for what you don't really know is going to be there for sure at this point in time. And I know, like you guys talked about the Generals, but like even like if you look at the Stars, it's kind of hard to move them because of the success they've had in the league over time. This is like the only year they haven't had real success, so or as much success, we should say. But so it's just very tricky situation to see how it all pans out, especially moving forward. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, honestly.
Yeah, we'll get to the game here. I remember when they announced the teams last year, and I know Pat was part of that, and kind of all of our lead up into the USFL season 1, and because there was a lot of questions about that, right? Like, okay, we have a team in Houston, and the XFL is going to be in Houston, or we have these New Orleans, or what's going on, and it's all kind of on the East Coast. And I remember the quotes were, and I think it was Johnston and whoever else was. I don't think Woods had a lot of the quotes, but it was like, well, these are the trademarks that we had available. And that's why we wanted these resonated, and we had basically these were the ones that were popular in the 80s, and we thought that we wanted to capitalize on that. I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't speak to the demographics or landscape that exists in 2022 and 2023, right? And I think it's I'm sure it was tremendously difficult back in the 80s to get market traction in New York, New Jersey anyway. Like that's very, very difficult now. I mean, ask the New York Guardians. I mean, they couldn't get anyone to cover their games at all up there back in 2020, except like you said, kind of Mike Mitchell going there. So it's weird to me that it's always been like we're relying on this nostalgia, but we're transplanting it in this new world and not making any adjustments on that. John, do you have any other thoughts? And we'll get to the game. We'll do some more stock, but I want to get to some game matchups.
No, I think all the points that you guys just brought up are great. Especially with New York, that whole area. I mean, they love sports, but they don't want to go support smaller teams. In the colleges up there, don't get a lot of support. And that's why I think that you see schools like Syracuse. They'll have a good year here and there, but for the most part, they don't. And especially in football, they're not a powerhouse or anything. A lot of the top schools there in the Division I level are FCS, and they're in the the Ivy Leagues or whatever. That's kind of the top football stuff there. And I mean, if you look at the names by themselves, Cornell Big Red, the Big Green, okay, wow, very original. These are supposed to be really smart people that don't understand marketing, I guess. So it's just when you compare those conferences, just from a college standpoint to other conferences, there's no real market value. It's just, we've just been doing this since the 1890s, and that's kind of that dies up there. And so we've seen that happen before, and that's kind of what I'm looking at. That's kind of what I'm comparing it to is you've got New York. It just doesn't work unless you are top tier NFL, NBA, and then they just live in this perpetual suffering of being a New York sports fan, because New York sports for the most part really kind of stinks. So
let's get in here. We'll talk some more about all this stuff. The game coming up. Mike is saying here scattered thunderstorms in the forecast for Ohio tomorrow. If it's that bad, it really helps the Maulers' chances. John, what do you make of this? Not the matchup I think anyone really expected. I prefer this over a Stars Birmingham Redux here just because it's something new. What do you make of this matchup?
The first thing was from last week. If you can look at the 4 teams that made it, 3 of the 4 teams were all new head coaches in this league. And I think when we did the USFL preview show and we were talking with Rick and all those guys that were on that show, one of the things that we were talking about was, when I was making the point, well, we have these new coaches. I don't know how well they're going to mix in, so I can't put a lot of stock into it. Well, obviously they mixed in very well. There were 3 out of the 4 teams that made it. And so I thought when I watched Pittsburgh, I watched the entire Pittsburgh-Michigan game. It was a great game. It was back and forth most of the time, and every time it looked like Michigan was about to put it away, Pittsburgh stormed back in. Pitt, obviously the most deserving team to go face Birmingham. They did a really solid job. This team has played really well together. Boogie Roberts has done a great job on the inside all year, gotten the recognition for that. Being able to rely on Troy Williams, kind of when you were trying to figure out the quarterback situation and able to run with him, that also helped as well. To me, I think that, the weather is going to have to be a big thing. And the other thing that they're going to have to do is they're going to have to find some way to neutralize Alex Magoo and really win in the trenches to have a chance at this thing.
Craig, do you think that the Maulers defense here is enough? Because Birmingham, by and far, best offense in the league. Is this enough? Are they able to? Can they score enough? I mean, in terms of a matchup, what do you make of the Maulers here against the Stallions?
Yeah, honestly, they're going to have to create some turnovers if they're going to have a chance, because the Maulers offense, it's better this year than it was last year, obviously. But when you still look at some of the advanced statistics and when they get down, in the red zone and stuff, they're still not scoring enough. They got a really good kicker in Chris Blewett this year, but they just don't have that extra punch on offense, and they've got really creative. And I give Tomlinson a lot of credit for what he's done with the offense and being able to adapt to kind of what the playmakers they have. I think honestly a big factor is going to be because the last 2 weeks, Bailey Gaither's played 42% and less of snaps. I think I'm the only one that tracks snap counts for USFL anymore at this point in time. But he was coming off that ankle injury a couple weeks back where he missed the game. So I don't know if they've just been kind of having him on a pitch count or what, because he's still gotten targets. He's still been involved in the run game a little bit. He's got to carry in both games. So it's you think if it was bothering him that much, they wouldn't try to use him that way. So it's kind of, has it been the matchup? Has it been the personnel? It's just been very interesting how they use some of these wide receivers this year, just in general.
We'll bring Pat here again. Pat, you're doing work here and bouncing back and forth. Pat, you took off your sunglasses. Can you put your sunglasses on for just a second?
Can you say that one more time, please?
I said, Pat, put your sunglasses on for one more second. You took your sunglasses off.
Yeah, no, that because of my opinion.
Oh my goodness!
See, there you go. That's bad. I had it ready, and then he logged off, and I was like, I'm ready to go.
Ready for it?
Yeah. Oh, what's that? Here,
that's his badge with a picture that definitely fits that even better.
Yeah,
you put sunglasses on that picture, it's freaking Jason Momoa. Good Lord.
All right, Pat, let's get your thoughts on this. We talked, Pat and I, we did our Monday, we've done our Monday recaps and all this stuff. What do you make of this now that this game is actually here and we're coming here, Mauler Stallions?
I mean, I've been pretty vocal about this. It's why not the Maulers? I don't think they're going to win, but I mean, I didn't think Arlington was going to win. So take that opinion for what it's worth. Something that does strike me is that they did activate another running back this week. So maybe they're going to lean on this. I think his name's Dwayne Gary or Dwayne Gray. I know they deactivated a Gray or a Gary and then activated a Gray or a Gary.
So Gray was deactivated and Gary is the running back that was activated. So you're spot on.
Yeah. So for those who are dyslexic, apologies on that. But I mean, it's getting everyone. But I mean, you just see what Magoo does and everything like that. I just don't think it's a firepower thing. I mean, coach tapped on it pretty easy. It's they might make these defensive stops and whatnot, but are they going to be able to put up 28 points, 30 points against the Stallions defense? And kind of seems like everyone's going to be going full send on this. You got one guy, Harper, who's questionable with, he's sick, but is he actually sick or he's got a stomach bug? You know what I mean? The illness thing is always a mystery to me, but I mean, they're pretty deep at receiver. I think they just last week they signed Johnson back to the team and whatnot. They signed back Ryan Pope last week just in case, so they added more depth on the offensive line. But Michael Petway is probably the most frustrating pass catcher. I won't call him a tight end. I won't call him a receiver. He kind of just does his own thing, but he's probably the most frustrating pass catcher in alt football because he has the potential to dominate these leagues and put on Hakeem Butler games, but always just kind of makes a boneheaded decision, stops running his route, something like that. So, I mean, I just don't know about the firepower. That defense is good, but I mean, you see what Magoo does. He's back there. He's doing some Mahomes-esque like versions of buying time. Like, I don't care how good your defense is. Eventually, someone finds a soft spot, and you get a 19-yard gain.
John, what do you make of this here? And just in terms of, I don't know, we saw such a blowout here with Birmingham and New Orleans, and here with New Orleans thought to be one of the best teams, and I think they were 4-0, 5-0, and then McCall came on the show, and then they lost like 3 games in a row, and then he shaved his beard, and it was just it was really weird season for the Breakers here. So that if Birmingham manhandles New Orleans like that, I'm a little afraid of this, and I see Evan standing by here. We'll get Evan on in a minute.
Yeah, so remind me when DC played. Go back to the XFL when DC played Arlington in the regular season. Didn't DC dominate that game?
Yeah, the second time they went to that was the one at the overtime at the end, right? Arlington, I think the second time at home, I think DC won the first, and then Arlington took them to overtime. So I guess it should have been a little bit more kind of eye-opening, right?
Well, so no, because they would have played once. They were in separate conferences. So then it was divisions.
Right. Am I remembering this in Arlington to DC?
I can't remember what the score was, but I remember DC for some reason dominating that game against Arlington the first time. Not talking about the championship game, talking about the regular season game when they played. I think that adjustments, that's a huge part of, when you go back and you look at the tape and you see what you did wrong, you come into a game with a great game plan. And when you have a team that is that much better than you, and they're going to expect you to come in and make a couple changes, but for the most part, they're like, we've already seen you. We know what we're going to do. Okay. So it was a close game. It went into overtime. Is that what I'm seeing? Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So close game. That just totally negates my point. I thought the DC dominated that game for some reason.
I thought I remember that for sure. I'm like, I swear to God.
Did Arlington come back into this thing? Does anybody remember?
No. They came back, and that was the whole thing. They had the challenge, and it was wonky there at the end. But yeah, they came and got it close, and then DC was like, we're still the best. But yeah,
okay.
DC dominated the recovery competitor.
Yeah, that must be. I'm remembering.
Yeah, you're half correct. I just am glad I remembered part of this.
No. So I must have, because the XFL season, I had a lot of different stuff. That's right before the draft. I had a lot of different stuff going on. So I definitely probably watched the first half and turned it off because I had better things to do. So no offense anyway. But no. So I think that when you have a close game against somebody, like a game like that, where you see someone being dominated, it gives you an advantage coming in to play them the second time, because they're going to expect you to kind of do a lot of the same things. They think they got you figured out. You come out, you make certain adjustments, and you do something totally different. That gives you an advantage going into something. So obviously, I think that the second half probably played a lot into what they were able to do in the championship with that game. But in this one, we've got a close game these two played in the regular season, correct? Pittsburgh and Birmingham. It was a very tight game. Pittsburgh was very competitive with them, which means Birmingham's not coming into this thing thinking that they know exactly how they're going to handle them. I think that in this case, Pittsburgh is the team that's coming in kind of thinking we know exactly how we're going to handle them, because they were very close last time. And with a team that is that much better than you, when you can be that competitive with them the first time that you play, it's almost a disadvantage when you're coming in the second time, because you're thinking that you're on the same tier with them. You were last time you played. And that's a dangerous school of thought. You kind of saw New Orleans get into that. New Orleans beat Birmingham outright early on in the season the first time that they played. And it was bad, if I remember correctly. So that's my point is, you've got a team right here that can do that's not close in terms of talent and at skill positions at different places like that. They're close in the trenches. So what you're kind of hoping for is you dominate the trenches, you get the weather advantage, and then make things happen.
Yeah, and we'll bring on Evan here. I know here, you also have to remember this, closer game, 24-20. Pittsburgh was on the upswing here. 1-3 started out slow, and then they really kind of flipped the entire schedule, or their kind of entire season. So you got to kind of look at the momentum coming in there. Let's bring on Evan here. Evan Willsmore. Evan has joined us on some of our CFL recaps here and talking everything else. We were on the rookie drafts as well. Evan, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Excited to talk about some USFL football. Been a while since I've done that, so.
Well, it's good. What's your thoughts here? And then I want to kind of do season. Let's get a little bit more on the game, and then we'll make this a little more evergreen and do some season thoughts. Evan, what do you make of the Maulers as Stallions here coming in?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting game. Had we not had the XFL Championship before this, where there was a similar matchup between records, I would probably think this was going to be a blowout. But after seeing what the Renegades did in the XFL, I'm looking at the Maulers here like we can't count anybody out. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I do think the Stallions will still win. Personal opinion, I just think talent-wise, I mean, I just look at their roster top to bottom, and I can't find anything close to that, even across the entire league. I mean, maybe New Orleans came close, and that's not saying that Pittsburgh doesn't have pieces that I don't like, but it's just, I mean, there's so much talent on that Stallions team, and they've just been clicking so much. I can't say it's going to be a blowout because I went on record, before that XFL Championship game saying, Arlington shouldn't be there, blah, blah. DC's going to, beat the brakes off them. It'll be a 30-point deficit, and that didn't happen. So I'm a bit more reserved now, but I'm still taking the Stallions here.
Let's talk here through some of these awards. And I think they have the MVP stuff coming out today as well. I know the media day is still going on here. Thoughts on the Mark Thompson of it all? I know that he was upset. We'll get John's thoughts and we'll go down the line. I know he was upset. I saw tweets like, I wish I was playing quarterback. I mean, we presume Magoo's going to get that right. But what did you make of Mark Thompson and then Frank Ginda here as a defensive player of the year?
Yeah, Mark obviously had a really solid year. Every time I turned on a Houston game, he was keeping them in a game. And I think that says a lot about what they were able to do with him, the improvement that they showed up in the trenches, because that was a team that was absolutely dominated last year. And and I get Mark. I get that he's all upset about it and thinks that he should be the MVP and whatever, blah blah blah. But here's the fact of the matter is, running back is a position that is really, really dependent on your offensive line. If you don't have an offensive line, you're not going to be a factor. And that's kind of what we've seen in these leagues is we've had really solid running backs going to teams, not getting the offensive line help that they needed, and just absolutely not playing up to standard. I mean, Darius Victor's a great example this year. That team is not as strong as they were last year in the trenches, and he ends up not looking as strong. Granted, he still had a good year, especially when they figured things out toward the end of the year. People came back healthy, but he wasn't the same player that he was last year, and that's not because Victor he's gotten worse. He's still right there in the prime of his age. It's just that he didn't have the support that he needed as much. So I don't like, and I've come from a running back, wide receiver background, so I don't like guys that want to, I should be this and that. No, dude, you're a running back. That's on the offensive line to protect you and get you the space that you need. So obviously, great year. 14 rushing touchdowns is an awesome accomplishment in 10 games or 11 games or whatever that was. But no. When you look at what we're assuming Alex Magoo was the MVP, well deserved. That's a guy that's really done a lot of different great stuff all year.
Coach Craig, same question to you, and then I want to talk generals here, follow up here in a minute. But what do you make of these offensive and defensive players?
Yeah, so I'm just going to say too, Mark Thompson played 8 games. He missed the first 2. So there's 10-game season.
Oh, sweet.
So 14 and 8 games is what he had, which was by far and away a record. But like at the same time, you have to keep in check that Alex Magoo had one of the best spring football seasons of all time too. So, and he's a quarterback and he's on the best team record wise and all that. So you add that all up, he's going to get the MVP. I think it's kind of interesting though, just when you look at the USFL, the 2 years, how the offensive player of the year and the MVP have been different people, and assuming that's going to be the case once again this year, I think everybody probably expected Ginda to be the defensive player of the year too after he's won 4 straight weeks. Some of those weeks I'd argue he probably shouldn't have won, but he's got the big fanfare behind him too. So there's a lot of good defenders in this league though.
To me, and I remember here, it seems like every year NFL media kind of, when we're talking MVP, and like, oh, could it be Jonathan Taylor? Oh, could it be Cooper or Cooper Kupp or whatever? Like, I would like maybe they could take a stand here, be like, hey, it's the USFL, like we could have a running back be our MVP. I get the Magoo thing about that. Evan, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, Mark Thompson, I think he deserved Offensive Player of the Year, MVP. Yeah, I think you still give that to a quarterback. I think a lot of the frustration on his end probably comes from the fact that the Gamblers didn't make the playoffs. Especially, and that's 2 years in a row now that he's been on the team and they didn't make the playoffs. Personally, I thought he was really underrated last year. I didn't think many people were talking about him, and then he kind of, I guess, exploded onto the scene this year. And everyone was like, "Oh, who's this Mark Thompson guy?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I remember watching him last year. I always had an eye on him." Same goes for like Frank Ginda. He was someone who I watched a lot last year, and I was like, you know what, this guy has a lot of potential. And he kind of, stuck through with it on the Panthers. And again, fortunately, his team made the playoffs. They're not making it to the championship game. But he's another one that I feel like both of those are correct. There's a couple other candidates I would have thrown in there. Again, I didn't watch every USFL game, so I'm not going to be the one to talk about that. But overall, I think, good picks, and especially with Mark Thompson. Again, I think a lot of that frustration just comes from the fact that, he's probably looking at a team like the Stallions where they're, in the championship back-to-back years, and it's kind of the why not me mentality. So.
And John, I would point out too that Reuben Foster had a phenomenal year with Pittsburgh. I mean, every time you put on the game, he was making a big play. Boogie Roberts had a great year. The Generals had an interior guy. I'm pulling his name up so I can make sure I got
Toby
it right.
Johnson?
Yeah, Toby Johnson, absolutely dominant all year. Like, there were a lot of guys that were in the candidacy for, defensive player of the year. So,
John, are you surprised the Generals had such a fall off this year?
No, we talked about that, during the USFL Championship game. And the USFL preseason. And, I said the first thing was my very first note on Mike Riley from the very first game that I watched, which the opening game, Generals lost to Birmingham, was Mike Riley is not in any mental condition to be running a football team. And then they proceeded to win 9 games back, straight games after that, and end up getting knocked out by Philadelphia in the in the sub championship game, whatever. And I was like, well, I was obviously wrong about that. But looking at the roster, there wasn't a lot that they did this year to improve it. You know what I'm saying? Whereas all these other teams were going out, making moves, bringing in people. You didn't see that. It was like the Generals kind of came back into this year thinking that we're going to be able to do the exact same thing we did last year and it's going to work. And it didn't, So I think also you kind of saw the age and the lack. I don't want to say lack of energy, but that's really the best way to put it. That, Riley is just an older guy, doesn't have that energy that can be captured by some of these younger coaches that were more successful. Even Ray Horton, he's an older guy, but he still has the right energy. So I think that was the big thing is, you kind of got an older guy running a team, trying to run off of last year's success. You can't do that in a professional football league. That's a whole nother beast. And that's kind of what happened in New Jersey this year.
Craig, in terms of, Ray coming in, obviously getting his team, to the championship game here, could have let age or whatever. It really seemed invested the whole time. Kind of felt like he bought in, especially, when we talked to Mad King, Kirby Wilson, and everything last year, and kind of how it was kind of a mess. I mean, he was walking into another great. Obviously you're going to rate good here. We made it to the championship game, but what do you make of his performance here through the year? Because I think it really could have gone the other way easily.
Yeah, it easily could have. And I mean, you go into the year, you kind of have this whole quarterback situation. Everybody thought it was going to be James Morgan because he's the 4th round draft pick in the NFL a couple of years ago. And he comes out, he doesn't play good, and you're going back and forth at quarterback, and it comes off to the slow start. You could have easily lost the team in 2 seconds like Kirby Wilson did last year. But Ray Horton, he has this good, solid foundation. He's been around the league. He knows what he's talking about. People respect him. He's in there. He's having a blast with it, coaching alongside his son and all this too, and just bringing everything together. And one of the things that he kind of did too is he kind of let his coordinators do their job, and he developed the whole team and just looked over everything, which I think is really underrated for a lot of coaches, because a lot of coaches I'm an offensive coach, so I want to coach the offense, or I'm a defensive coach and I want to coach the defense. And a lot of times when you're a first-time head coach, you miss a lot of things because of that too. So I think like anytime at any level, like a first-time head coach should not try to take on both responsibilities at the same time, just because it's so hard to do and so hard to juggle. And we've seen that time and time again at various different levels too. And even going back to like Mike Riley too, like talking about the age, but like I remember last year they make a big deal too, like when he was talking about how he had to help take care of his wife and whatever because she's got like early dementia and all that stuff too. So you take that football and add it all on together, it's going to take a wear and tear on anybody, especially someone that's his age.
Evan, who have you been most pleasantly surprised by this year in terms of performance? Could be team or coach or kind of what excited you coming out of the season?
Definitely the Breakers, I would say, kind of living up to that expectation. Now I understand they got blown out, last week to the Stallions. But I think ultimately, there was a lot of hype going into that team, prior to the season, especially acquiring McLeod Bethel-Thompson from Toronto. And yeah, I think they lived up to all those expectations. Obviously, it was more than just him. They had several other players on both sides of the ball. But, I feel like that was a team where it was like, it's very rare, in my opinion, to see teams live up to such high expectations because there was a lot of people talking about the Breakers. Even last year, I feel like that team was hyped up and they didn't perform well last year. But this year, they at least made strides in the right direction. And personally, I love Coach John DiFilippo. I think that was a great addition for them and, someone who should be there for many more years to come. So I would say that team and then specifically their coach, I was pleasantly surprised by.
John, what do you think McLeod does next year? Like, I was so interesting to me. It was last Sunday, right? The playoff game, and I'm watching Chad Kelly lead the Argos and just absolutely kick the snot out of the Elks. And then I'm watching, McLeod, and, it wasn't a great game, right? And Chad is kind of getting, I feel like they're wanting him to be a little bit of like the Nathan Rourke this year, like, even though he's significantly older and has a different history of like, this is our guy now. And Dave Naylor is writing articles, is Chad Kelly the most important player playing in the CFL right now and kind of all that stuff. You see McLeod here, and I don't know if it's tired or just the team or whatever. And, obviously not having a great end of the season. What do you think he does now?
I think that at this point, when you've left Canada, you're not going back, especially when you've got the family issues that, that was the reason that you came down, not bad family issues, but, just the issue that you want to be with the family more. You don't want to be up in another country, 20 weeks out of the year, 22, 23, I guess, with all the training and everything else that goes with it. And, giving them something that's more, stable, I guess, right? Stable in the sense of consistently being there. And, as a dad, I can understand and respect that 1000%. I think that anybody that is a parent, they understand what it's like to sacrifice that kind of time. You're watching your kids get older and you're just, you're ready. You're ready to, I can't miss all this time. I got to make sure that I'm here, that I'm invested and interested in what they want to do. And so I think that's kind of where he's at. Whether he comes back, I think that there's a good chance he comes back for another year, but I think it depends on John DiFilippo. Does he come back, or does he get an opportunity to go coach somewhere else? Obviously he's not going to get it this year in the NFL, but this was a very hot coaching candidate. A couple of years ago, we were talking about him and, as the offensive coordinator of Minnesota being a head coaching candidate in the NFL. So I'm sure that those opportunities are going to open themselves at the end of the year. And so I think that will have a lot to do with his decision as well on whether he comes back and plays football or if he's going to go ahead and say, you know what, I've had a long, good career. It's time to hang off the cleats and just move on.
I think it's interesting, and I think Pat and I talked about it here a couple weeks ago, where we're going into, potentially here, John and I talked off the top here about going, are we going into year 3 or whatever, but I think you get a lot of it, and obviously DiFilippo was new going into this year, but you get a lot of these guys that have been on the teams for 2 years, or you have the Mike Riley that's been on, and you're like, okay, let's run it back. Let's do whatever. And I think it's really challenging to run it back that third time, right? Whether you're a player or coach, staff, Coach Greg, in terms of like USFL offseason here, are you expecting a lot of movement? What do you think in terms of players and coaches?
I think it's going to be kind of interesting too, because we saw a lot of guys especially like from the player end, try to get back up to the NFL last year. We only saw a handful like even get on active rosters at one point last year too, with mainly Turpin. God, the safety that was with the Maulers that played with the Packers a little bit last year. Was it Micah Abernathy, I think?
I mean, you had the injury, right? The guy that was with the Morgan, was it with the Cardinals, right? One of the guys got injured there as well and kind of missed the beginning of the season.
I'm trying to remember, but I know Abernathy, his safety, got up for a couple games with Packers last year. He's on with Atlanta for this year, so it'd be interesting to see how many of those guys tried to make that jump up too, because a lot of them came back down this year too. It'd also be interesting to see like what a guy like Alex Magoo does. Does he try to go back up to the NFL, try to like get a backup job somewhere, or does he try to stay and stick with the league? And I know like the first time the XFL was around, they were talking about a guy like Josh Johnson like that, who's a veteran. He's been around with 1.5 million teams. Would you rather go back and fight for a backup job, or would you rather go be the face of the XFL at that time? So maybe Magoo just does that and tries to negotiate some type of pay raise with the USFL in there, or he tries to make that step up, because he's kind of in that awkward age where he's still young enough where he can go back up to the NFL pretty easily, because I think he's 27, 28 at this point in time. And or he could just stay down there and be like, I'm going to ride out my prime for the next 5 years down here, assuming that everything works out, or or go jumped up to the CFL at that point in time, like if the USFL goes under or something like that. But we don't know exactly all that. I think the coaching end is kind of where it gets, where a lot of guys seem to take more jobs. They're not as committed to like these jobs, whether or not it's the head coaching job or not. But I think we'll probably see a good handful of them come back next year once again. So I think Michigan's situation could be kind of interesting with like Mike Nolan, if he decides he wants to coach like another year. Mike Riley, obviously, with the age and his wife and all that. But I think like Ray Horton's going to be back. I think Skip Holtz will be back unless somebody really wants to offer him like a college job again. Maybe he'll consider that at that point in time. Curtis Johnson, I think, will be back. And I think he actually did a pretty underrated job too with Houston, kind of what the mess that he walked into too. And he kind of, when he was at Tulane, he started to build that program back up. And then I can't remember the guy's name. He's been there for like 5 years now, kind of took it and ran with it. And they've kind of had their ups and downs since then too, but talked to a lot of Tulane players and they really spoke highly of him. But I think for a lot of it, we'll have a lot of the same coaches. Whether or not Todd Haley comes back might be another question too at that point. So there's just a lot of factors, but I think for the most part, we'll probably see like, I'd guess like 5 or 6 head coaches coming back once again. That's probably what you're going to see with most of these leagues on a yearly basis, though.
I think it was Skip was the UAB there or whatever was trying to hire him. I think it was in the offseason last year. He was in the runnings for that, which would have been funny to have him, stay in Birmingham. I was thinking of Chris Odom with the Browns, and he was the one that he got placed on the IR. Right
he tore his ACL, I think, right in early training camp.
Yeah, Evan, we talked about this, and we did our whole XFL to USFL or XFL to NFL kind of wish list here about a month or so ago, and the players you wanted. It's crowded here, and we've seen this, and obviously we've seen the XFL signings slow down as well, and we have all these gambling busts and everything with the NFL and everything else. But in terms of the USFL players getting into the NFL rosters right now, what are you making of that, just in terms of player talent level, but then also just the amount of space there is right now for players?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I think it's going to be difficult, and I don't mean that from a talent perspective, because to be honest, in my personal opinion, I think this version of the league compared to last season was more talented. We can debate that. We can sit here, go through all the rosters, make comparisons. I'm not going to do that, but that's my personal opinion. Now, with that being said, there was a time where I thought, by now at the end of June or whatever, from the XFL, there would be like 50 or 60 guys signed, and it's been hard to push 30. So there was something last year, I forget who said it, but it might have been Daryl Johnston or one of the people, but they were talking about how the USFL is actually set up better for coming into the NFL, even though they finished their season long after the UDFA process, much closer to when teams are reporting the training camp and everything like that. Now, I wrote that off pretty quickly. I was like, nah, like you want to get it done earlier, right? But it could be interesting now. I mean, there's still very limited spots, right? And, like I was saying before, there's still like, in terms of the XFL numbers, they're not nearly what I thought they would be. And I'll admit that any day. But I think the interesting conversation to be had is like, maybe the USFL does match that number, even though they're finishing later. And then you really do have to open that discussion back up, because I feel like I'm not the only one who, thought that was silly, thinking that the USFL finishing their season, in July, if you make the championship, would be better to make the NFL, even though you're only a month and a bit out from the NFL preseason at that point. But you never know. Like, now I'm starting to rethink that, just given, again, like how slow the XFL signings have been. And like I said earlier, just how much the talent has improved, in my opinion, whether it's a minuscule increase or a big increase. Again, we can debate that. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting conversation to be had on that front.
Excuse me. It's interesting because we saw players already this year with the XFL, like the defenders that were in the championship game, almost feeling like that extra couple weeks hindered them from getting signed right away, right? We saw players, immediately, Danucci and all that, already doing tryouts, basically the week after the season was done, and already feeling like that was a handicap. It's interesting now, like you said, if you're making the championship game, I mean, it's 4th of July weekend here. I mean, we're going in and all that kind of stuff. Rick was on the show last week, Rick now with the IFA and all of that, talking, he does believe XFL has a better timeline. I think I can unequivocally say now, I kind of agree with that as well. I thought that the April thing was going to work good, and I kind of bought into a lot of that hype last year, and we've kind of lived through this calendar cycle now. John, what do you make of that in terms of now getting out of this, trying to get these USFL guys in?
So first off, I think that the alt leagues are in a really weird spot right now with trying to get guys moved up. And the reason that is because of the additional COVID year that a lot of college prospects have right now. So great example is these talent pools that have been in the NFL draft over the last last 2 years have been incredibly deep across almost any position. The reason that is because you have all these extra guys getting an extra year that they wouldn't normally have coming out of college, which gives them another year of prep, another year of development, playing substantial snaps in football. So it's almost limited the alt football league effect from that standpoint. And everybody's signings went down. I mean, the CFL used to always put out 10, 20 guys every year, and they put out like 4 or 5, this last year into the NFL. So that's not to say that the talent is less in the alt leagues right now. It's just that the demand is, when you're building a roster, you want younger guys. You want guys that you can develop. If you're bringing them for a training camp, you want a guy that potentially is going to double his ability. And if you want to look at it from a video game standpoint, he's going to improve that much over the course of a training camp that, okay, well, now he's actually competing for a roster spot. Whereas some of these guys, they're getting this development, and a lot of them aren't there yet compared to what these guys coming out of college have the upside to hit. So the alt leagues have to be patient. The players that are playing in the alt leagues have to be patient, because what's going to end up happening is here, and we got one more year where the COVID year is really going to impact the draft pool. 24 is really the last year that we're going to have that, at least to the effect that we already have. I'm still looking at a lot of 6-year seniors. There's not a lot of 5th-year juniors left. It's kind of cycled itself out. Once you get through that, once you get to the 2025 season and you're looking forward, I don't know how many of these leagues remain. I don't know who remains. I don't know who's left standing. But that's when you're going to start to see these 50, 60 numbers coming out of these leagues, the 10, 20 coming out of the CFL that we've seen consistently prior to the COVID years.
John, I don't know if I'm still standing in 2025. You know what I mean? Like, I have to get on that. Listening to you, and I think that this is, that's why you're on here, is to give insights and stuff. And I think that that's great. And it just makes me think, and I've kind of said all along, this tracking is tremendous, right? And like that they put the feather in the cap, and like, okay, we got X number of players on, but that's why I firmly believe these leagues have to find other metrics to be able to champion that they are proud of during the season. Of just USFL last year we got 50, I think it was 51 guys signed, that like we are a success. And now this year it's not going to be that. And so is anyone going to look and be like, well, hey, you only got a fifth of that sign now or a tenth of that signed, and your ratings were down to that. Like, that's why you need to find other metrics to champion there, because you're never going to hit, especially now. XFL is never going to hit with USFL, and they're never going to hit. It's going to spiral down. Craig, comments on that, and then we'll go to Evan.
Well, I was even going to say too, with what John was saying, because you got all those COVID year guys too. It's a blessing and a curse for these leagues too, because you're not getting as many guys that you already have going up, but you're catching all the guys that don't latch on everywhere else. So you're getting that young depth of talent pool. And then when you go 2 years down the road, when there's not as much supply coming out, essentially, then you have all these guys that are still relatively young that have been playing a bunch in your leagues, that have been developing instead of sitting on practice squads and stuff like that, being able to actually make the jump. And some of these guys, that's all they need is that extra time to play at the same time, and just to prove and put that additional tape out there too, especially some of the like smaller school guys too. So it's just, once that point happens, as long as these leagues can stick around, that's when you're really going to be able to shine out. But, you know, this year, next year might still be a little bit rougher in terms of guys going from XFL, USFL, going to the NFL, making an impact, or at least staying on rosters at that point.
It's just weird. And like, I know this wasn't all, I mean, the XFL got killed because of COVID and all of this stuff, but going through the time that we've done the podcast, and Evan's been a part of everything, and we've kind of all been doing this, you know, we saw that spring league in 2020 have McLeod Bethel Thompson and Brian Scott and kind of all these guys of, okay, what do we do? Where are we going? And it's been a really weird, because of COVID, really, you know, has kind of dictated the course of a lot of these leagues and the things we've covered on the podcast. I mean, Evan, what do you make of that? Just in terms of kind of carrying on the conversation here. And I'm kind of keeping an eye on, because I want to see when this USFL, I'm getting emails here. I want to see if we're announcing stuff. So what do you got, Evan?
Yeah. Well, I said it when we did the XFL to NFL show. You know, it's interesting timing, because when the XFL was around in 2020, that was a time of expansion in the NFL. You were opening up practice squads. You know, the talent pool wasn't as great because, like John said, all that COVID eligibility stuff hadn't really come into play yet. So the XFL was actually able to take advantage of their season getting cut short, and they sent guys to the NFL right away. Like, you know, within, like, it was like, you know, late March, early April, guys like PJ Walker, Dietrich Nichols were already on NFL rosters. Now it's a completely different world. It's flipped 180. Again, like John said, with all the eligibility stuff, it's just now you're at a point where the NFL, and I've said this before too, favors a certain type of player, and that's going to be the younger player fresh out of college. You know, they don't quite favor these leagues yet. I don't know if they ever will. It's probably going to be a couple years. You know, they kind of have to settle in, you know, develop over time, whatever. But yeah, like, I just think, you know, it's such a complex thing. And I'm really interested, to see how, just how many guys from the USFL get signed here. Because again, we just talked about before, is this sort of later end to the season, is that a good thing or not? I think the number of signings, you know, that might prove it here, because with the XFL, you know, it's already showing like this is not the same world it was 3 years ago. You know, it's so hard just to get guys in, even like good players. You know, it's not, I mean, the one thing that I noticed, especially with the XFL signings, is some of those guys didn't even play a lot for their respective teams in the XFL. They were just younger. You know, you look at guys like a Trent Harris, who I covered extensively last season. You know, I'm sitting there like, you know, he's 27, 28. Why isn't he on a roster? He went to Broncos minicamp, but the reality is, unless you're like, you know, 24, 25, you're already pushing it at 26. Unless you kind of fall into that range, it's just so difficult. And it's honestly, it's a shame, because these leagues have a lot of talented players. And I was just talking about earlier how I think the overall talent pool and the USFL has increased. You know, I think the XFL talent pool compared to 2020, I'd say it's about the same, but ultimately you have more players and more leagues. And the fact that those guys, you know, just don't have the same type of opportunity to get a shot in the NFL, it's unfortunate, but there's not a lot that can be done about it until, you know, you just have to kind of give it time. It's one of those situations where until, you know, we at least a year, but probably more like 2 years, you know, we're not going to get those, you know, pre-COVID or COVID numbers that we saw, because even the AAF had a decent number of guys signed, and that was well before COVID, you know, a year before. And again, their season was cut short too at the end of April, so they had some time.
I want to get John's thoughts on this, and I got a couple other things here. We'll get out at some point. I was kind of keeping an eye on the USFL chat. Or Zoom here. They're just getting to the Stallions, and I was kind of hoping that it would curtail the end of our show and Daryl coming on and announcing that stuff. We'll see, but I think the Maulers must have gone because Stallions were supposed to start like a half hour ago, so they must be running late, which is fine. I mean, they're doing the media day. I don't have a lot of questions for that kind of stuff. John, what would you know? So we've talked this promoting. How do you deal with this spring leagues and all that? What would you like to see these leagues do besides just hanging your hat on? We've signed 37 players to NFL rosters.
Oh, well, if we could get into not just that aspect of it, but developing personnel, developing coaches, developing all those other aspects of a team, you know, and I'm going to use a great point here today is the Senior Bowl just had their third scout signed this year from their staff onto an NFL team. And they run a full scouting department as if it's an actual NFL team. They run, you know, the same type of grading systems. They use all the same different stuff. So it's developing scouts to move up into the NFL. This year they didn't have the teams coming in coaching. They had individual coaches basically getting a promotion compared to what they normally work. And a lot of them came out of the Senior Bowl with promotions with other teams or within their own team. You know, because they did a good job of the week and people got a chance to work with them and see them and they liked them. So, you know, I think that that's the next avenue that you really have to find a way into. And that's tough to do, right? Because there's not always, you know, you're not always going to have the money or the resources to send a lot of these guys and do what the Senior Bowl does, right? With they running an actual department like that. The XFL doesn't have a department, you know. I've talked to Doug Whaley about that myself, you know, so they don't have a department where they, you know, break down stuff. It's really all on the general managers, you know, the 8 guys, and sending tape down to coaches and seeing if the coaches want the guy. So I think that's kind of where you're at, right? Is you got to find other avenues to develop people. So it's not just players, it's every other aspect, front office, communications, coaching, personnel, all of that.
Well, it's just not sexy. It's not sexy to have that be a calling card of the league. I mean, they want these, and you've seen The Rock and how many million press conferences did he say, you know, I was player 54 and kind of all that stuff. I remember, you know, and I love Coach Becht when we went down to the Arizona Showcase last year, and he said, my goal following the season would be, I want every single one of my players signed to an NFL roster. And you're like, how do you sell that at all to Battlehawks fans of, invest in this team, invest in what we're doing, and then, you know, we're going to move on to all these guys at the end of the season? I think they have to figure out some other way, and, like, you know, whether it's developing things, but I don't know, like, how do you sell that to people to watch your league? Like, here, come watch, is people, you know, cut their teeth in broadcasting, or we develop the players better. They got to figure out some way to market these versus just we've signed X number of players. You know what I'm saying, John?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and that's a very solid point too, because it's the whole reason why you have this. But it's in the same way. How do basketball teams do it? You know, minor league basketball. How does minor league baseball do it? How do the hockey leagues in Canada do it? It's all about finding that right balance of, okay, well, this is an area that needs and wants to support something like this, and that's what I think the XFL did better than the USFL for the most part. USFL did a great job picking Memphis. They got a lot of support from Canton, Ohio, because there's not a lot of professional stuff that's going on there anyways. So those are 2 really good places. But, you know, going to St. Louis, that was a great job by the XFL. Going to Orlando, getting some support there. Didn't have a great season, but you got some support. You got some people that are interested in that there. And so what you really have to do is you have to sell the community stuff. You got to sell, hey, we're invested here. We're invested in the community. Yes, we're trying to put players in the NFL. Yes, we're trying to move them up. But it's about, hey, come see these guys before they're in the NFL. That's really what people are trying to sell. And if you can do that instead of targeting big television markets and this and that, no offense, Seattle's not a great market either for one of these, but you know what I'm saying? Like, You got to target those specific why is the word escaping me at the moment? Those areas. You got to go get those markets, those ones that, you know, that they haven't they don't have it They don't have professional football, and they want it, and they're not going to ever get it, but give this to them.
Let's go to Evan here, Will. I know you got to hop off pretty soon, and I don't think we're going to stay on tremendously longer, but let's go to Evan to kind of add on to the conversation.
Yeah, well, this conversation about sort of, the personnel departments here in any of these leagues is fascinating, especially with the USFL, because they have a program that, and something I can appreciate, they have a lot of younger people, coming through and kind of exploring new opportunities. There was a very good article that went up on Fox by Reed's best friend, RJ Young, talking about the GM of the Stallions, Zach Potter, who's 21 years old. He's like me. He's a college student. And he was like the director of player personnel last season and kind of worked his way up into the role this year. And, talking about signing guys like Deion Kane and Thaddeus Moss, all their new additions that have put them in a position to win the championship. And that's a very fascinating story. You don't hear that very often. Like, that opportunity wouldn't really be presented anywhere else. But, at the same time, as much as that's a great story and, good for Zach. And I hope everything, goes well for him and he can win another championship. The reality is, the personnel departments are still deep, and they're not talked about very much. I'm bringing this up because that's one of the first articles I've actually seen, about like a USFL front office or an XFL front office. I know in the XFL, like John pointed out, talking to Doug Whaley, they, like, besides the director of player personnel for each team, whether it's Mark Lillybridge or Randy Mueller or whoever it be, Von Hutchins, there's no one. Like, they're the ones that are putting the roster together. There's no assistants there. And that's a really daunting task, especially given that the XFL just expanded their offseason roster size to 90. You have to individually sign 90, but that's a huge task. And not only sign them, but you got to scout them and work with the agents, and it becomes a huge thing. I can't imagine how large their, databases and pools must be. I'm sure it's in the thousands. But that is the part of the league that I want to see develop most, both the XFL and the USFL, because I really feel like they could use that, and it'll make things better. I mean, I'm not saying that, these leagues they have done a bad job of developing rosters so far. I think they've been great. People put a lot of time and effort into this, but it just makes it so much easier. And it's a process where, it allows for expansion, right? You're given, more people jobs and opportunities. And I understand, there's some people saying, well, the XFL maybe employed too many people this year because there were a lot of layoffs after the season, especially in their, marketing and communications departments. But that's besides the point. My general thing here is, the more personnel people you bring in, the easier it is to kind of, find talent. I'm not saying anyone's done a bad job, but like, we're at a point now where there's just so many players, and through this year and next year especially, I mean, if they don't start getting those people in as early as like this offseason, and especially again with the XFL, like, they're doing their showcases and everything. Like, they've got a lot going on. It's so much to manage, and especially for one person on each team, having to handle roster construction, things like that. Again, in the USFL, I know it's a bit different. They've got a couple more personnel positions, but even then, is it enough to really, build how many guys do you have building the roster? Because we know in the NFL, it's a huge number. There are so many different components to that. And, as someone who is studying sports business, and we'll go into that after college, I would hope that there's, jobs like that waiting for me. And, if these leagues expand, then I have a better chance of, getting in somewhere, and then it all works out. So I don't know, maybe that's more personal than anything, but it's definitely, again, it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. And I think part of that is because, like Reed said, it's not really a sexy element. You don't want to hear, the casual fan doesn't want to hear about your, assistant director of player personnel going to some all-star game. I mean, great. Like, to us, that's cool. But to everyone else, it's like, half those people probably don't even know what the Senior Bowl is. So that's kind of my take on it.
Well, Evan, that's because they know it as the Reese's Bowl.
Evan, before you get out of here, the Hub stuff this week kind of coming out, and obviously they had their relationship with the USFL. Anything on that before we get out of here, or before you get out of here? We'll take a couple more questions on here, but anything else from that? Hub kind of ceasing, or I don't even know what the proper wording is, ceasing operation?
Yeah, I would say ceasing operations. I put an article up, and Mark put an article up on, both news hub sites, and we kind of talked about, what happened, and the partnership with the USFL most likely won't be continuing. Now, does that mean that the next version of the hub camp, the grid camp run by Tom Goodhines, that's not saying they won't send players to the USFL, because I'm sure they will, but it's just a changing time. And there was a vision there at hub that unfortunately didn't pan out in the form of a Senior Bowl type game. There were just some things that they couldn't get worked out. And that was ultimately the end goal, I think, of that program. Not to say that the camps, weren't successful. And I talked about all that in my article. But long story short, Hub is no more. All those were in Southern California. Now it's grid camps run by Tom Goodhines, who was the senior vice president at Hub. And he also, worked in the Arena Football League for a while. He's going to kind of take over with his own camp. And I'm sure it'll be a bit different. I don't know all the details yet. I'll have to talk to him about that. But the general idea is there's still going to be a free agent camp, and it will expand to more locations across the country, which I think is a good thing, because a lot of these camps, were pretty strict to Southern California. They were going to have one out in Florida that didn't materialize because of Hurricane Ian. But this first grid camp is in Pennsylvania. I heard there might be one in Utah at one point as well, and just other parts of the country in general. So I think it'll be good for that to expand. And I definitely trust Tom with that venture. I know he'll do a great job, because he was, so closely tied in with everyone there at the hub thing. So yeah, that's what it is. I mean, it's it's business, and it ran its course. And I think they had 15 camps over the course of 3 years, going back to I think the first one was maybe August or September of 2020. So, they were very successful, and it was a good run. But, onward and upward, as I like to say.
Well, Evan, I appreciate it. All your work. People can track you over on the hubs and everything else. You can get out of here if you need to. We'll run through a couple more. I had a funny one here. We'll go to Craig, because he hasn't got to chat for a minute. This is from newbie editor who random, and I've seen this a couple times coming in here. Who would win, Defenders or Stallions?
And this one's kind of interesting too. This will be the last one I got before I gotta go too, but it's really interesting. I think there's a chance the Stallions win this one. I kind of like the quarterback situation a little bit better with Alex Magoo. Running backs are both very talented on both ends. I actually like both those running backs really good, between Abram Smith and CJ Maribel. They're both two guys I liked quite a bit coming out of college. Obviously, CJ is a little bit better pass catcher and can do other aspects in that regard. If Marlon Williams was healthy, the wide receiver edge would go to Birmingham pretty clearly, I think. But, it's probably a lot closer there. Lucky Jackson had obviously a great year and everything too. Deion Kane coming along came on really slowly this year. He had a couple kickoff touchdown returns early on, then he had the weird illness for a while, but towards the end of the year he's really come on a lot, so that was great to see. And then Sternberger coming back on to, I think they definitely have advantage at tight end. And as long as Scooby Wright's healthy on defense, I think they probably have a slightly better advantage on defense too, so we can go with Stallions.
Well, there you go. Well, Coach Craig, appreciate it here. We'll let you hop off, and then John and I'll kind of wind this show down here soon. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Follow Craig on kind of everything he's got on the socials, and we'll hide all that. Thank you. John, what do you make of that? Who would win, the Defenders or Stallions?
So the problem here is I'm too personally tied to this, because, I know Greg a little bit, and he's a great guy, and I really like his mentality on defense, and I know that it's super aggressive, and I know that he'd send the house against Magoo to try to slow him down. And then you got Tiamu and running the double offense with the two quarterback system with him, and getting De'Aaron King involved. It'd be a close game. It'd be really close. Those would be two really, really fun teams to watch.
I think it'd be exciting. I've had that a bunch on here, and just in terms of kind of, hey, what do you think about all that? Before we get out of here, overall, looking back here, we're going to end the season. We're going to crown a champion here over the weekend. Pat and I will be back on Monday. We're going to do our post recap show and kind of put the USFL season to bed. Success, not success. What do you make of the season?
Absolutely. It was a success. Okay. Anytime you can get to a championship game in these alt leagues and play it, that's a success. And I think we said that at the end of last year, but it becomes even more of a success when you have back-to-back years where you're able to pull it off. These leagues have it's been an entertaining product. It really has. I think that moving the kickoff back allowed offenses to have better field position, which allowed more scoring. That helped as well. The rules and stuff, we won't see any impact on that. I don't think at the next level, the NFL, they're not going to take anything from this. But overall, like I said, you get through a year, you get this, you're successful. That's positive. That's a successful year. And they got through all the games, and none were canceled, and no teams bailed out, and no teams fell out, and we have stars that are emerging out of this league. We'll see how many get signed afterwards. I can't see more than 10 or 15 really being signed at all. Just even with space, there's not a lot of space. There's not a lot of space left in the league for these guys, unless we have a whole lot more suspensions coming down the line from this gambling stuff. You're going to have your injuries, but there's a whole line of guys still in line for that. I mean, I can see 10, 15 of these guys getting signed. So
it's crazy. Because I saw this, was it last week now, where they had kind of the Carson Wentz of it all, and he kind of had this snafu on social media, posting like his hunting photo that was very odd, but he was brought up that, hey, Carson Wentz is still obviously unsigned after being let go from the Commanders, which I don't want to see anyone lose their job, but I wasn't sad to see. I co-signed that with Ron. Ron hit me up, and I said, yeah, that's good. We let Carson go, but they put the list out of like, these are all the guys that are still unsigned, current, NFL. We're seeing all that, let alone now all of these other guys coming in. I mean, that's the thing that's crazy, is the NFL already has this surplus here of these are all these talented individuals, and now you want to add all these other guys to the mix, and that's where we talked earlier about kind of this 2 to 3 year jump, which I do think is going to be interesting to see. And do you find a lot of guys that just say, all right, I'm moving on? I mean, I tried, I gave it my shot, and we did this, and maybe I've been grinding since 2020, and COVID kind of threw me for a loop, and now I'm kind of in this, and you get to the point where you're kind of moving on. I'll be curious to see kind of what happens here in the next calendar year.
Personally, I don't think you're going to see that many drop out for that reason. And the reason is because these guys in the USFL right now are getting paid $40,000 on average to play 10 weeks. Think about that for a second there, Reed. 10 weeks, you're gonna make $40K, and then you get to go somewhere else and go, you stay in shape, but you can go take a job. Your wife's working a job, most likely, your girlfriend or whoever is that significant other that you're doing stuff with, and you're building this family, you're building this life. How many jobs would you turn down if you're gonna make $40K in 10 weeks?
I get it.
That's a good gig. And then you can come back and, you can do some other stuff on the side, and you can work your side hustles and side projects. You can maybe you got a job where you can go work somewhere with a friend that's doing something, trucking, or who knows, like all these guys have lives outside of football that allow them to, they stay in shape, they keep working and stuff. But yeah, you make $40K. That's a great investment, for the rest of your year. And so I think that we've designed these leagues well to help the players so that they're making something substantial. It's not a waste of an investment for them of their time. And at the same time, it's not putting all of the stress, of trying to keep up with these guys and pay them and stuff on the leagues as heavy as it could be, so you have your 10-week commitment, you get your 11, maybe 12 weeks. The injury, you got a chance that maybe you get hurt. That's obviously something you got to take into account. But, when you're at this level, a lot of guys are playing because they love this game. Like that's why I do what I do, Reed, is because, I got to a point in my life where I realized if I'm not doing something with football, I'm miserable with my life. So that's where a lot of these guys are. So I think that you're not going to see as many walk away because they're content playing in this league. And understanding that their opportunities going forward is probably not very limited, if any at all. And they are playing because they love this game. It's a good gig for them to work over the summer and then go back into whatever they're doing back home and, support their family, support and keep this dream alive.
It's crazy to me. And I kind of wear two different hats on here when I do my CFL interviews and stuff. Cause I respect all of them and everything they do. And I love the CFL and the kind of all the access they've given us. But it is hard when you sit there and you look like, man, if these things go another couple years, it's you kind of know, okay, this is going to last. We're going to have USFL season 4, 5, 6. And like you said, if I can go live in Birmingham and make 40,000-45,000. Maybe we win the championship game, and the USFL I think they do the championship game and not the playoff wins or however they do that. But if I'm going to make that, or I could go up to Winnipeg, live, for, play 21 weeks, live up there even longer, have to maintain a second household up there, deal with, the Canadian pay rate and the tax exchange and all that. It's a really tough sell. And because they'll say, oh, well, because our average salary, might be 100,000 or 120,000 Canadian, that you're getting there if you're kind of past that initial hump. Yeah, but I've interviewed players on the show. I got Vernon Adams. I got a house in Montreal, and then they traded me, and I had a place in BC. I've still got my place in Tacoma. I'm paying all the exchange rates and all that. It's a really hard sell. And I don't want to say that as a neener, because we got a lot of hate when all this XFL stuff started. But, if you have competitive spring leagues that even if they're not, you're matching 80%, but just knowing the certainty that I can go play that next year, I think it'll be interesting. I think it's a fascinating time if these leagues, we started the show saying is USFL coming back next year? We don't know. But if they do, it makes you a lot more thought process, where I think it was Darren Gill was on our show, and he was an agent. He's one of the CFL agents. And he says, yeah, I don't have as many CFL teams calling down and saying who's available, because a lot of my guys are tied up, or it adds another wrinkle to that.
And by the way, Reed, we have officially managed to stall long enough. We have an MVP.
Oh, do we? I don't have the email yet. Oh, there we go.
It was just announced on Twitter. Alex Magoo is the USFL most valuable player.
I'll pull it up here. Well, this is so exciting. Thank you. I'm glad, because I was going to be, I figure, because Daryl Johnson was going to come on, and I said, normally what they do is they send out the presser as he comes on the stage. I mean, that's when I've covered some of the XFL stuff, and the second Danny comes out, it's Danny Garcia had said XYZ, and then you're listening to her and she's saying it because it's all on the teleprompter. That's incredible that they knew what she was going to say. So what do you think, Alex Magoo here? I mean, we kind of expected it, but what do you think?
So the first thing is, I was watching Birmingham. I think they were playing Michigan this year. It was up at Detroit. It was up at Ford Field. It was a 2-minute drill right before they're going into halftime. It was on Fox, so you had the mic access was amazing. He comes over the sideline. He talks with Skip, and they start talking about what they want to run this play. And the concept that they're discussing, I know exactly what he's doing, right? It's 3. You're going to run 3 vertical routes. You're going to try to attack their 2 high look that they've been giving you all day, 2 high safeties. And that's the whole idea of the attack, is we're going to hit them there, right? Jay Sternberger was going to be the target, blah, blah, blah. And I'm listening to this conversation from my couch, right? And I'm just geeking out now, because I'm like, oh my goodness, I was thinking the exact same thing. This is what you could hit. This is what they've been showing all day. Well, what ends up happening is Michigan ends up rolling late a third safety back. So they end up playing 3 deep. It's 3rd and long. Need a touchdown before the end of the half. And Magoo sees it right away. He can't hit Jace. He wanted Jace to stop. So he scrambles around a little bit, pulls off some crazy throw, it almost across his body into the end zone, touchdown, ends up improvising the thing. Or I think maybe it was underneath to Marable. Marable took it in. But I just remember thinking, I knew exactly what they were thinking. I knew exactly what they wanted to accomplish. I heard the whole coach's conversation with him. I knew what he was trying to do. And he improvised that to the best possible way that he possibly could have. And I'm bringing that up because he did that all year. Every time you turned on Birmingham, this guy's making some crazy play and pulling off something insane. And then the other thing to take away from this is he wasn't even the starting quarterback entering the year. Jamar Smith was the quarterback, and Smith had an unfortunate injury, ended up missing this year. And this guy stepped up, which is very similar to what happened last year, right? Which he was supposed to be the guy last year. And he ends up taking a backup role to Smith. So you want to talk about, first off, resiliency? Magoo has it. Staying with it, not quitting, not giving up, doing exactly what the team needed him to do. He was more of a receiver last year. Yeah, absolutely. He's got it. And then coming out and taking advantage when your moment when to shine, taking advantage of that. Magoo did that, and I think that's outstanding. You can't find a story in perfect. Well, you can look at Jalen Hurts, but it's a very similar story to Hurts at Alabama, and waiting his turn, but accepted this time. It's much higher level. He got the whole year. It's an incredible story.
I don't know if this does anything. Let's see here. USFL just tweeted from the presser the moment they told him he would. Let's see if this plays here at all. I think we got a few more. Oh, is that gonna? Oh, that's
we got it.
Does that play out? Okay.
Yeah.
What? Hey, party. Hey, how you doing? What are we doing in here?
So I think there's one more question that needs to be asked. We're gonna let Daryl go ahead and ask the question.
It's been fun for us to watch the development of the relationship, and we got to see a little bit of it here in the press conference. So whether it's time learning the offense, understanding the why, or time together to develop that respect, is time the number one reason that you became the USFL's MVP this season?
Yes, MVP.
There you go. That's cute. So let's let the video play here. There you go, Alex Magoo. That's cool. They posted it on there. I was like, do I try to like hack the Zoom and like play it onto the thing today? I think we had enough on our hands. I think we had enough people coming on and off. But anyway, any other thoughts on Magoo? I know they're doing the Sportsman Award, but God knows when that's going to be. But any other thoughts on Magoo?
Yeah, I think Pat and I have talked about this before, just in talking and having conversations. Like, this is probably the most likely quarterback that we see make a jump out of both the leagues this year. And that's already, considering DiNucci, right? Obviously, McCarron had a great year in this XFL. He's not really interested, I don't think, in going to the NFL. He wants to stay and play in the XFL where, his kids can watch him play and he gets to play and he has that opportunity, and it's a great gig for him. But with Alex, I think that this is the quarterback that you're looking at that has the best shot at jumping up, because the big knock on DiNucci was the turnovers, right? Too many turnovers with Seattle. And it was almost surprising that he was signed as quickly as he was after the season, considering the quarterback talent that was in that league. So, Teamu was probably a recipient of that, having to wait and play the championship game, and they went and got DiNucci instead. But Magoo is a guy, like, if you got some sort of issue in training camp, you got to move a guy, an injury. This is a dude this is probably the top of the list right now that I'm calling as a personnel director, going, I need a guy in my camp that can do a lot of different things, and guy can do that. Can he come up here?
No, I totally agree. And barring any injuries here in the championship game, because obviously we saw a Case last year, and I think Case would have been called. And I still can't, as a wedding videographer, I saw the photos of Case's wedding and him wheeling down the aisle. And I had a groom. It was like a week or two before the wedding. He was a motocross racer and broke his leg and was in the walking boot and did his first dance in the walking boot. And I said, that is a very smart man there with his wife, because I'm sure she wasn't happy that he was doing that. But no, I think it'll be good. I think it's exciting. We'll look forward to this. Anything else? We're an hour and a half. I feel good about this. I appreciate you sticking on, start to finish here. But, always moving parts for these live shows. So I appreciate it. Anything else?
No, man, I appreciate you having me on again. And I'm excited to watch this game tomorrow. Who's going to win, Reed? Who do you think wins? What's your prediction? You listen to all these opinions. You take it all. What's your pick?
Yeah, my head says it's the Stallions. My heart's the Maulers. Obviously, I got Matt Mangle over there, my boy. But like you said, talking Magoo, I watched that New Orleans game, and he's running into the end zone doing finger rolls with the football. I think he's playing on a different level right now. Yeah. And that was why the question earlier was, who would win, the Stallions or the Defenders? I don't know, because to me it looks right now like the Stallions are playing with kid toys a little bit. Like I'm the adult playing with the children here, where I don't know if that speaks to how good the Stallions are or speaks to maybe how not so good some of the other teams are. Like, I don't know where that level of delineation is. Where the Defenders looked really good, I don't know. Are the bottom four XFL teams better than the bottom four USFL teams? That's a debate for another day. But I do feel like the Stallions are kind of on a different level right now. And I thoroughly expect them to walk in there and kick ass. But hey, if this, we saw it with the Renegades. I mean, anything can happen, and that's like Pat said. Why not the Maulers if their defense and Jaron kind of the assistant coach of the year and kind of continues to keep those guys up. I think they're going to go in really motivated. I think that they have a lot of chalkboard material the Maulers do.
Yeah, I think that I want to see Pittsburgh win the trenches, and I think that they have the personnel to do that, on both sides of the ball. It's just when you get the pressure on Magoo, you got to find a way to neutralize him. And that was my point, is why he's the MVP. That's a guy that he gets outside the pocket and he gets an opportunity to improvise, and he's insane. He's incredible. And he's done nothing but make plays all year. Doesn't matter as a runner, as a passer. It doesn't matter. He's done it. He's been extremely successful. Like you said, the adult playing with the toys. They've been definitely a grown ass team, and I'm right there with Chris Felicia, the Bear that you pulled up. I read the article you pulled up earlier. I'm right there with him. I'm taking the 7, and I'm going Birmingham, probably winning by 2 touchdowns.
Yeah. I do. Last thing here, we did stall long enough. Congratulations to Ethan Westbrooks for the Sports of the Year award. So, I think that's probably is that an office vote? Is that a fan vote? Is that I don't know how that kind of all came about, but congrats to him with the Panthers. Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's 2 Panther defenders now that received awards for being, great players and on and off the field now. I think that speaks a lot to what Michigan's doing with bringing in people. Good people that work with the community well, and Michigan's done a great job with that all year. So shout out to everybody on the Michigan staff, including the players that win and the people that pick them. They've all done a great job. So
well, thank you, everyone. If by some reason you've made it an hour and a half in here, and you haven't liked and subscribe on here, appreciate it. Pat will be back with me on Monday. We're flip-flopping this week. We'll be doing the USFL follow-up on Monday, and then Jason Hussey will be joining us. Big BC Lions Toronto game. If you want your football fix after the weekend, big BC at Toronto here Monday for the CFL. I think game of the season thus far, after BC absolutely trounced the Winnipeg Blue Bombers last week. 2-time Grey Cup champions there, lost last year to the Argos. So should be exciting. John, please plug all your stuff. I know you have your new podcast and everything else you're working on, because I really do appreciate you being on here start to finish.
Yeah, of course. The Sick Podcast Network, I joined them, and we have the Sick Pod with Draft Vogel, which is it's basically more discussion about scouting than it is the actual draft. So you hear a lot of podcasts where we talk about the prospects and we talk about, this and that and all those different things. And this is more, how do we find those guys? What are we looking for? So we get into some nitty gritty. We're going to have some really solid guests that are going to start circling through once we've established our baseline, I think. Done a great job with my co-host. He's done an awesome job. Matt Ungashik. It's a very German name, and I start to pronounce it German. I have to stop myself every episode in introducing him. But it's Ungashik. He's great job. He's a great guy. Really knows his stuff. And then, my draft guide for 24 is available. It's basically live, updated every day. It's a OneNote document, notebook basically that you're going to get. Comes with your Office subscription if you've got one of those, or just really any computer. You can access this thing. $40 access for the entire year, and it's 3,000 plus prospects. I mean, some insane deep stuff. It's been great, Reed, because it's not just been fans that have bought it. I've had personnel directors at alt leagues buy it. I've had agents buy it. I've had other people in the media buy it. It's been really nice to see the wide variety of people that have purchased it and gotten the access to it, which I think speaks volumes to what I've been trying to accomplish with it. It's exactly what I wanted to do with it. Make it something for everybody, that everybody can get some digestible data out of it. So I appreciate you letting me plug all that stuff and having me on here. And I'm glad I can make it from start to finish. It's been a fun year for alt league football. We got the CFL still left to go, and hopefully, and now we got this IFA starting up. I mean, there's going to be a whole lot of different stuff.
Yeah, Rick was on last week talking IFA. That'll be interesting. Another football league here. And like I said, yeah, no days off with the CFL stuff. Like I said, a tremendous weekend, the Monday game, but BC is just on fire right now with Vernon and everything else. Very excited as America's CFL team, I call them. But no, John, what I like about, just you doing all that, obviously brings the knowledge on here, and you're so great at what you do. And if anyone doesn't listen to this, and like I could see why John is a great podcaster and knowledgeable person and guest and all that stuff. But I like with this guide and all that, because it is. I like these maybe more alt leagues and some of these other guys. Like, let's crowdsource a little more. We have all of this, and we're not these multi-billion-dollar. We got all this, and who cares? And we're kind of in our ivory tower. Like, no, let's embrace the people that are doing this for the love of it, and kind of lean on them, and maybe where we have certain weaknesses. And like you said, all these guys that have to be scouted, and Evan was talking, all the guys in the rookie draft and everyone else, it takes kind of a village here. So I appreciate that. I think that'll be it. We'll get out of here right at the hour 40 mark. Appreciate that. Appreciate John, everything. Anything else?
No, sir. Thank you much. Appreciate
Awesome.
y'all listening.
Yeah, enjoy the game. Should be a good one. I'll say go Mullers. Go Mullers on that. But I think Buckham, I think they have it. So we'll see you guys next time.